What's going on, you guys? This is DerekJ Speaks, and today we are talking about New Japan Pro Wrestling Wrestle Dynasty live from the Tokyo Dome on January 5th. This was the big follow-up show to their annual January 4th Wrestle Kingdom show, this year, of course, being Wrestle Kingdom 19. I'm not here to talk about that specific show because I did not watch that show. I'm aware of some of the results on it, but in addition to that, they announced this big joint show with a bunch of other companies like AEW, of course, CMLL, Ring of Honor, STARDOM, all these promotions coming together for Wrestle Dynasty on January 5th in the same building. And this show was mainly built around one big match, which included the return of Kenny Omega, who has been gone since December of 2023. He went out due to diverticulitis. He has been gone for well over a year, and many people have been anticipating his big return to pro wrestling. And it wasn't an AEW ring, technically, but this was the event where Kenny Omega made his first in-ring appearance, match-wise at least, and it was against New Japan's Gabe Kidd, and I was definitely looking forward to this match the most, mainly because I wanted to see how Omega looked. Omega hasn't wrestled in over a year. He had a very serious injury that took him out, so it was a matter of seeing how would he look, how physically would he look, would he still be the same wrestling-wise in there. I wasn't all that familiar with Gabe Kidd. How was he going to mesh with him? All of those questions were answered in spades because these two went out there in the co-main event and tore the house down and stole the show in what already is an early match of the year contender, and we're 5 days into 2025. So that's pretty great. Omega looked great. He looked physically in great shape. Gabe Kidd, like I said, not that familiar with him. I haven't been closely following New Japan in the past couple of years, so I'm not overly familiar with Gabe Kidd. But for my first time seeing him and for him being in a big spotlight match on a huge show like this, I think he did a tremendous job. And these two, they stole the show easily, hands down. And we will discuss more of that as we run through this entire card. It, as of this recording, is 3:28 in the morning. So as you can tell, I stayed up all night to watch this show from start to finish. And I don't regret it because overall, top to bottom, it was a very good show, a very good night of professional wrestling. Some matches were better than others. Some matches weren't all that great at all. Some had pretty flat finishes, like the main event, for example. But overall, I am not disappointed with the action that I saw in the ring on this show. So we are going to go through everything from top to bottom. So we're going to circle back to the very beginning and go through the pre-show. The pre-show had a fatal four-way in the finals of the Women's International Cup with four different women representing four different promotions. We had Willow Nightingale, Momo Watanabe, Persephone, that is, and Athena. All of them representing different companies, of course. Willow representing AEW, Momo representing STARDOM, Persephone representing CMLL, and Athena representing Ring of Honor. And I was looking forward to this match only because this was one of the first opportunities I've had in a very long time to watch an Athena match because she is secluded to Ring of Honor, and I don't really spend much time thinking about Ring of Honor these days. So it was really cool to see her in action, and what a match it was for her because in this match, she suffered her first pinfall loss in 2 or 3 years. She got pinned by Momo Watanabe to lose this match, and Momo is the one to walk away with the win. And due to this win, she gets to receive a championship match against any champion from any promotion of her choice. And the fact that she pinned Athena in this match kind of plants the seed that she most likely is going to end up challenging Athena for her Ring of Honor Women's Championship at some point in the future. And then we also, speaking of Ring of Honor, we had the Ring of Honor tag team titles on the line. Dustin Rhodes and Sammy Guevara teamed up to take on representatives of the House of Torture, Sho and Kanemaru. This was a standard match, nothing overly special. They did mention that Dustin Rhodes competed on the first ever January 4th show in the Tokyo Dome when they started the traditional January 4th Tokyo Dome shows. Dustin Rhodes wrestled on that show, and he teamed up with his father, Dusty Rhodes. So, pretty cool full circle moment for him to be on this show competing with Sammy Guevara and walking away successfully retaining their ROH tag team titles after Dustin hit the final reckoning, and then Sammy went up top and hit a swanton bomb, I believe, on Kanemaru, and they got the win. On to the main show, we opened things up with a lucha gauntlet. Several talents from multiple different promotions coming out, all representing the lucha libre style in their wrestling abilities. I ain't gonna lie to you, I didn't really know a lot of the guys in this match, but for what it was, opening the show, it was pretty fun. You were promised lucha libre, and that's basically what you got. You got a very quick, fast-paced match, and a lot of chaos, a lot of dives. In fact, there was a certain part of the match where it looked like everyone was just taking turns doing dives, and one person would do a big dive out on everybody, and then everybody would gather around and wait for the next person, and they did that whole thing for a little bit. That tends to happen in matches like this sometimes. I'm not usually a fan of it, and this one, I wasn't a fan of that, but overall, I thought it was fine. And in the end, Taiji Ishimori, he was in this match, and he walked away with the victory. So I didn't really know. I knew some people in this match. You had Hechicero in there. He's been on AEW television before. I mentioned Taiji Ishimori, Titan. He was in there. Mascara Dorada came out at one point in this match, and he was very impressive. And El Desperado, who is the current IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion, when he came out, everyone who was already in the ring just stopped what they were doing and ran up to the ramp to jump him, basically, and pull him back in the ring, and everyone took turns beating him down. So I thought that was a pretty funny spot in the match. But like I said, Taiji Ishimori was the one to get the victory in this match. Next up was a 5-minute exhibition match between Hiroshi Tanahashi and Katsuyori Shibata. This match was made literally 24 hours prior, after Tanahashi successfully beat Evil in a match at Wrestle Kingdom. The rest of House of Torture started to gang up on Tanahashi, and it was Shibata who came out and made the save. And then once he did and ran off the rest of House of Torture, he challenged Tanahashi to a match, which he accepted. Now, due to Shibata's history in New Japan, and of course the devastating head injury that he suffered many, many years ago, and if you read Dave Meltzer's report all those years ago, you would know that Shibata's brain was removed from his skull. So, sorry to take a shot at Meltzer, but it's so easy to do so. But because of the severity of Shibata's injury, that's what kept him on the shelf for so long. New Japan wouldn't clear him until eventually they did, but only for these quick exhibition matches. And then eventually he wound up in AEW, where he has wrestled very regular, long matches. But AEW, or I should say New Japan, still does not clear him to wrestle those kinds of matches. So we instead got a 5-minute exhibition, which was just Shibata and Tanahashi literally exchanging chops. They chopped each other's chests until they were both beat red. Tanahashi did sneak in a quick headbutt on Shibata, which surprised me. But it was just chops for 5 minutes, and then the bell rang, the time expired, and then they shook hands and held each other's arms up, and that was it. Very disappointing, but you knew what it was. It was an exhibition. They weren't going to really do anything. There was no real moves, nothing to really sell. These guys just slapped each other's chests. And looking at this, I fully expect that this is going to be a match that we see on AEW television. Tanahashi is entering his final full year as an in-ring competitor. So much like John Cena, 2025 is going to be Tanahashi's farewell year. And so at some point this year, I could definitely see them running this match between Tanahashi and Shibata in an AEW ring. And I mean, good luck promoting that and making your AEW audience care about it, because I mean, Tanahashi to them is the New Japan guy who comes over every now and then Shibata, he is on the roster, but he's not really much of a focal point. So we'll see how well that turns out when that time comes. Maybe around the time of Forbidden Door, which is in August this year, maybe they'll hype that match up for that show, because there is a lot of history between Shibata and Tanahashi. The two of them, plus Shinsuke Nakamura, those were three of the younger guys who New Japan kind of had to build around in the mid to late 2000s when the company was in its darkest period. Those were three guys who stepped up and who New Japan put the muscle behind to really push, and they really came out on top. And of course now Tanahashi, he's a legend. Shibata, he is undoubtedly a legend in New Japan, and Nakamura is too, even though he's been removed from New Japan for many, many years now, but he was still a part of that nucleus of talent who the company built around during some very dark days, which they can relate to now because they are currently in the middle of some dark days, but not in terms of in-ring quality, because a show like this proves that even if they don't really have many draws in the company, they still do have some top-tier talent, so that's good. Up next, we had a winner-take-all title-for-title match. We had Mina Shirakawa defending her Rev Pro British Women's Championship against Mercedes Moné, who of course is the AEW TBS champion, but she's also the New Japan Strong Women's Champion. So she was defending her title, Mina was defending hers. The two women went at it, and they had a very good match. This match, in comparison to previous Mina Shirakawa matches that I've seen, the most recent one being her match with Mariah May on Dynamite not too long ago, this match I found to be better than that one, but not by too much. But it was still a very good match. It was weird, the dynamic here, because it felt like Mercedes was playing the role of the babyface in this match, with Mina working over her previously injured, her surgically repaired knee throughout majority of this match, and Mercedes was basically down throughout the entire match, and she won through the skin of her teeth almost. She hit the Monet Maker out of nowhere and she got the win. But a weird dynamic, but the fans seemed into it. They were really behind Mercedes. They seemed to like her, and these companies seem to like her too, because she now adds yet another championship to her collection. She won the Rev Pro title. She is still the New Japan Strong Women's Champion, and she of course is the TBS champion. I think there's another title around her waist too, but yeah, Mercedes is the new belt collector. And say what you want to about her character and her presentation on AEW television when she was brought in to TV last year, and how her character has been presented so far, and her mic work and all of that stuff. Of course, there's much criticism to be lobbied towards that, but when it comes to these big matches, most of them, she goes out there and shines, especially in these New Japan matches that she's had. She really comes through, and this was no exception here. This was a really good match between her and Mina Shirakawa. Up next was a special singles match between Brody King and David Finlay. I mean, Brody King, big dude, just tossing and throwing Finlay around all throughout the match. Finlay, though, of course, he came through in the end, showed his power against Brody King, hit him with a power bomb, and then hit him with his overkill finisher to get the win here. Brody King, I mean, I thought he might win, but Finlay, he is one of the homegrown New Japan guys who I figured they still have, time and investing in him to be someone to build things around. This is the same man who went over on Jon Moxley and Will Ospreay at last year's Wrestle Kingdom show. So clearly they think highly of him. They have Gato with him in his corner, so it's not much of a shock that he won here. Brody King, one of the best big men in wrestling today, and he definitely fit in quite nicely in New Japan. So, good stuff here. Up next, another special singles match. Claudio Castagnoli, representing the Death Riders, took on Shota Umino, who had quite the weekend for himself. Of course, Shota, he challenged for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship in the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 19 the previous night. Went up against Zack Sabre Jr. I did not see the match, but I heard there was very mixed opinion on it. Apparently those two went out there for at least close to, if not right at 40 minutes, and sounds like it was a match that did not need to go 40 minutes, which, just looking at that on paper, I mean, Zack Sabre Jr., Shota Umino, two very incredibly talented wrestlers, but just on paper, it's a very weak main event for Wrestle Kingdom already. But then having them go out there and trying to live up to the expectations of those previous years' main events that would go 30, 40, 45 minutes, putting that kind of pressure on those two to do that and come away with favorable, opinion from a lot of the fans was a pretty tall order. I did not see the match, but I did see the image of Tanahashi's face on commentary, who looked like a very disappointed dad after that match was over. So I just pretty much chalked that up to being a good representation of how that match went. But this match that Umino had with Claudio, of course, Claudio with the Death Riders, with Jon Moxley. There is history with Jon Moxley and Shota Umino. Mox was basically like a mentor for Umino, and ever since this whole Death Rider stuff has been going on, Umino has been very much against what Moxley has been doing, and so that paved the way for this match. I guess they are doing this to kind of build eventually towards Umino and Moxley going at it one-on-one again, but when we get that, I don't know. But for now, we got the match with Claudio here. Claudio, very strong, very powerful man, and he took control of the majority of this match, but Umino did get the win, and he got a win. Speaking of Jon Moxley, he beat Claudio with the Death Rider DDT. So he gets the win here, and it was interesting, the crowd reaction, because Claudio, who was the clear heel, he even came out during Umino's entrance and attacked him and got booed for it. But as the match went on and Claudio was doing a lot of his power moves, he did the big swing, all this stuff, he was getting a lot of cheers. Meanwhile, Umino was getting kind of a mixed reaction. So I didn't know if the previous night's main event played a role in him getting the reaction he did here, or if Claudio was just that cool. I don't know, but it was very interesting. This was not the only match that had very interesting crowd reactions on this show, by the way. We will get to that a little bit later on. But yeah, so very interesting, and we'll see where they go from here. The match was fine, but this was another thing that pushes the Death Riders angle from AEW, which I'm very much not a fan of. But At least this match wasn't bogged down by crazy interference like most of Jon Moxley's matches are now, so there is at least that. Up next, all that stuff that I said before about the previous matches, a lot of them good, some okay. The show was pretty much alright up to this point. Here's where things started to really heat up. We had another double championship match. This time, it was one man holding two different titles and defending them both. So Konosuke Takeshita, the AEW International Champion, and as of the previous night's Wrestle Kingdom show, was the New Japan Never Openweight Champion. And he defended both titles against Tomohiro Ishii. And this match was pretty damn good, I should say. This was probably the first great match of the night. Overall, the second best match of the night, in my opinion. And, Ishii, he has been around for many, many years. We see him from time to time in AEW, and he's nothing really special there. They kind of just stick him out there in these random matches that don't really have much meaning to anything. Takeshita, we all know how great Takeshita is if you watch AEW, but in New Japan, he's just as great, if not greater. And Ishii in New Japan is presented much stronger, and these two clashed here in a way that really made the crowd come alive at this point. The crowd was into a lot of the stuff on the show, but they really got into this match. A lot of very stiff moves between these two. A lot of stiff shots, stiff forearms and kicks and knees back and forth between these guys, and some very uncomfortable spots. At certain points, Takeshita would dump Ishii on the back of his head and neck with German suplexes, which very uncomfortable to watch, but again, not the most uncomfortable match on this show. We will get to that later. But some great back and forth stuff between these two. At one point, Takeshita laid out Ishii with the high knee and then hit him with a big lariat, but Ishii kicked out at one, so he was really fired up after that. Then Ishii himself hit a big lariat, and then Takeshita kicked out of it, but both men were down. Gave the fans a chance to applaud both men, who were just having a war up to this point. Both men stood up and grabbed each other by their waistlines of their tights and trunks, and they just started giving each other forearm shots back and forth. A little bit later on, Takeshita's up top, and Ishii goes up there and hits a Frankensteiner off the top. But then, a little bit later after that, Takeshita ends up hitting Ishii with a brainbuster, but Ishii popped right back up, hit him with a forearm, and then a sliding lariat. And then as Ishii got Takeshita back up, Takeshita slipped out of it, hit Ishii with a poison rana. The two of them went back and forth with different blows and counters and shots until Takeshita hit the Raging Fire one last time. He did hit it a little bit earlier. He hit it off of the top rope, and that was only good for a 2 count, which was pretty crazy because they've established this as Takeshita's finisher. So it was crazy that an Avalanche Raging Fire did not get the win, but nonetheless, he did hit one last one here, and it did give him the win. And Takeshita retains his championships over Ishii. A fantastic match. My words do not do it justice. This was a great match. It was the best match of the night up until, it remained the best match of the night for another hour or so, maybe a little bit less than an hour. It did not get topped by the next match, though, that being the triple threat tag team match for the vacant IWGP heavyweight tag team titles. We had the United Empire, represented by the Great Okan and Jeff Cobb, representatives of LIJ with Tetsuya Naito and Hiromu Takahashi, who at Wrestle Kingdom had a match against each other. They went one-on-one, teacher versus student type of thing, and Naito, the same man who has a very long-standing eye injury and can barely see out of his eye, he somehow gutted it out and went out there and wrestled what by all accounts was a pretty good match against Takahashi, and he got the win. So then 24 hours later, these two are teaming up to go after the tag team titles. And then, of course, Matthew and Nicholas Jackson, the Young Bucks, were in this match too. They made their in-ring return. Last time, at least I've seen them in the ring, was the Dynamite, the Halloween edition of Dynamite, where they dropped the titles to Private Party. Very great match, but they dropped the tag team titles after holding them hostage basically for several months without barely any defenses of them. And so, of course, they drop them to Private Party. They disappear from TV. They reappear in New Japan. And in their first match challenging for championships, they win the IWGP Heavyweight Tag Team titles. They hit the TK driver on Okan to get the win here. And as they were leaving, at least Nicholas, he spoke to the camera saying, this might be the last time we ever show up in New Japan, or we will, we don't know. And then I guess they posted some video on social media later on in the night talking about how they might show up on Dynamite and show up there with their tag team titles. They don't know. The match itself was fine. Nothing that really stood out to me personally. It's just a multi-man, multi-team match. It was fine for what it was, but it was nothing overly special. And the Young Bucks winning definitely caught me off guard. I was not expecting them to win here, nor was I thinking that they had a shot of once again being tag team champions anywhere. But I would prefer they be New Japan tag team champions rather than AEW tag team champions. I don't ever need to see that again, especially with how their last run went. And based on the way they were talking here, it looks like New Japan are going to be in for a run like that themselves. So I don't know what they hope to accomplish by putting the belts on the Bucks after Moxley held the IWGP Championship last year. That did absolutely nothing for their business. So I don't know what they think putting the tag titles on the Bucks is going to do for them now, but maybe they have a plan for it. I don't know. But, the Bucks have been off of TV, AEW television, for the past several months, and I have not missed them. So them teasing that they might appear on Dynamite soon, that really does not do much for me. But I guess we'll see how that turns out. Up next, the IWGP Global Heavyweight Championship was on the line. Yota Tsuji defending the championship against the scapegoat Jack Perry. This was probably the weakest match of the night. This was very dull, very slow, kind of boring, which is a good way to describe Jack Perry in this scapegoat character. When you have a company that posts footage of this guy getting beat up in a backstage real-life altercation with CM Punk in a cheap ratings ploy like they did last April, ever since then, I just have no excitement whatsoever about Jack Perry. And it does not help that, his style of wrestling now with this character and this character overall just is not very exciting, which I get is the point. He's supposed to get heat. He's a heel. He's, doing this stuff. He wrestles slow. He uses a lot of holds and all that, but it just wasn't all that fun to watch. And Yota Tsuji, I'm not really familiar with him all that much either, but I've heard some good things about him, or at least I know he's someone positioned as someone who New Japan is looking to build up as a top star in the company, but wasn't all that impressed by him either. But I was happy to see him win because he did get the win. Now we'll give him this, he hits a pretty wicked spear. He got a spear on Jack Perry right out of nowhere at the end, and he retained the championship. So good on him to get the win. But now we come to the reason a lot of people even stayed up to watch this show. I can speak for myself and say that's the reason I stayed up for this show, which was the first of what they billed as 2 main events on this show. Kenny Omega making his in-ring wrestling return against Gabe Kidd, who is representing the War Dogs faction within the Bullet Club. I cannot believe it is 2025 and there is still some version of the Bullet Club that still exists. That is insane. Crazier than that is there's a representative of the Bullet Club who gets loud cheers. That was a big story of this match, is that Gabe Kidd, when he was making his entrance, he got a huge ovation from the crowd. And Omega did too. He had this whole big special entrance for himself. The crowd popped for him too. But as the match got going, the fans were firmly behind Gabe Kidd, and there were a lot of times where there was a mixed reaction at best for Omega. Certain things he did, he got flat out booed. Like when he picked up Gabe Kidd and dumped him over the guardrail and it made him crash through a table. And then when Gabe Kidd came up bleeding, yeah, that got some pretty negative reactions from the crowd. So Kenny Omega, this big-time New Japan star who has been gone for several years, he comes back, makes his first in-ring return here, and he gets booed. But, I mean, he's not a New Japan guy anymore. He's an AEW guy. Gabe Kidd, he is New Japan through and through. Throughout the entire build-up to this match, he has been a die-hard defender of New Japan and very anti-outside New Japan, anti-AEW, all that stuff. So I'm sure that played a role into his reaction here. Plus, he was damn good in this match because he came back from that table spot and he took over on Omega and he crashed him into a different table near the ringside area head first, and even threw pieces of the table at Omega's head. And then Omega came up bleeding worse than Gabe Kidd. He was bleeding a gusher, which was reminiscent of the match the last time Omega had a match at the Tokyo Dome 2 years ago in his match against Will Ospreay. That was another really great match, where in that match Omega was the outsider who is returning to New Japan to steal the spotlight from a younger gaijin wrestler. So that was a very similar spot here. There was also a very similar outcome in that match as there was to this one, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, both men, double juice match here with Omega bleeding buckets compared to what Gabe Kidd had. But this really livened things up here. This turned from a regular wrestling match to an all-out brawl because there was a bunch of steel chairs introduced into the ring too. Both men went up top and Gabe Kidd hit a superplex off the top, crashing down onto a pile of chairs in the middle of the ring. There was one part of this match that I did not like, which was both men picked up chairs. At this point, the referee, who was AEW referee Bryce Remsburg, he got taken out. And both men are going back and forth, and they each have a steel chair, and they are hitting each other in the head with the chair, unprotected chair shots. Omega's just standing there holding a chair of his own, and it's just looking like he's basically waiting for Gabe Kidd to hit him in the head with the chair, which he did. And he just bashed him in the head with this steel chair. And then Omega did the same thing to Gabe Kidd. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, man, this man was out for over a year with diverticulitis. He did a giant dive earlier in the match out over the guardrail onto a pile of bodies. He came up selling his side, which he was selling his side throughout the majority of the match, the side that he had the surgery on for his diverticulitis. So, and he was selling it a lot to the point where it was like, is this real? Is he just selling? What was that? So I thought that was a very unique aspect of the match. But when he hit that dive, he was selling like his hip, and he even had one of the young lions come over and give him an ice pack, and then he kind of kicked him away because he took too long to give him the ice pack. So I thought that was funny. But he was selling his hip. Here, he's over taking unprotected chair shots to the head, and I'm just thinking, man, we have gone over a year without having Kenny Omega in the ring, and he's doing everything in his power here to make sure it's another year before he's back, trying to give himself a concussion. But it didn't last that long. They got away from that pretty quickly, but still, I have said it before and I'll say it again. I have no desire to see people take unprotected chair shots to the head. It's just not something I find interesting or entertaining anymore in this day and age. But it is what it is. It got a reaction, which was the ultimate goal here. Both men going back and forth. Omega hits a V-trigger, but then Gabe Kidd comes back and hits him with a spinning lariat, and then both men go down. Omega is back up. He hits a big Terminator dive to the outside, gets back in the ring, goes up top, comes down with a missile drop kick to the back of Gabe Kidd. Then both men go up top, and Omega hits a giant half-and-half suplex that sends Gabe Kidd crashing down. He basically flipped over and then landed face and front first. His knee kind of smashed into the ring, so he briefly sold that for a little bit. Then Omega tries for the one-winged angel, but his side starts hurting and it prevents him from having that upper body strength to lift up Gabe Kidd. So he sells that, he winces, and then he goes down. And then Gabe Kidd locks in an abdominal stretch. Now that's a move that you don't really see a lot these days, but it was very appropriate to be in this match because of Omega's injury. So I thought that was a perfect spot for this match, and it got some good heat there. We see Gabe Kidd hit a knee shot and then a pile driver on Omega, but he kicks out. Then Omega gets hit with another pile driver, but Omega got his foot on the ropes. It's one thing to kick out of one pile driver. Do we need to see people kick out of two in a row? Well, I guess the second one, he got his foot on the ropes still. But whatever. Both men eventually get back up. Omega hits a V-trigger, then a power bomb, and then a second V-trigger. But Gabe Kidd kicks out at one. But despite this resurgence of energy, it wasn't enough to be sustained. He gets put back down. Omega hits him with the Kamigoye knee and then gets him up for the one-winged angel, and that is probably, to this day, the most protected finisher in all of pro wrestling, because hardly anyone has ever kicked out of that move. I think maybe one or two people have kicked out of it. I know Okada, I think Okada kicked out of it, but I don't really know anyone else who did. But rarely anyone kicks out of that move, so you knew when he hit it, it was over. Gabe Kidd was down for the count. 1, 2, 3. Kenny Omega wins in his return match, and they show both men, Omega celebrating, Gabe Kidd's getting helped out, and they show a shot of Tanahashi at the Japanese commentary table, and they get a good close-up shot on his face, and the man is in tears. They get one shot of him at first that, the tears are kind of streaming down, and then they cut back to him later, and he's just full-blown sobbing and crying at what we just witnessed. And I think that was a great representation of the kind of match we saw here. Heading into this show, I genuinely did not know what kind of match Omega was going to have. He came off of a long layoff. You don't know how that's going to impact his in-ring abilities here. But he came out, and he and Gabe Kidd had a tremendous wrestling match here. It was a fight at different points, but overall, it was a really great match. And, hats off to Gabe Kidd, too. Like I said, heading into this match, I wasn't overly familiar with his work. I've seen a few things here and there, but to see him in a big spotlight position like this against someone like Kenny Omega, he definitely held up his end of the bargain, and this was a coming out party for him too. But Omega, he is a big star, and he is one of the biggest stars in AEW. And I look at this match, and now I'm thinking, well, he survived this one, and he looked great, and He already busted out an early match of the year contender, so get his ass back on Dynamite pronto. I know they promoted that he is going to be appearing on Dynamite this upcoming week, so I don't know what he's going to be doing, but getting him back in the mix and putting him in a top spot and having him out there, if not weekly, then most weeks, putting out matches like this on TV and having some interesting feuds and just being a big name and a big presence on the show that desperately needs him. This show is struggling in many ways, and having someone like Kenny Omega on the show back in the fold regularly will do nothing but help the product. So I'm looking forward to seeing him back on a regular basis on AEW television. And matches like this showed me that we're lucky he made it through that serious, severe injury, and he looks better than ever. So hats off to these guys. This was a tremendous match and was the best match of the night and probably should have closed the show. But New Japan is very traditional with wanting to keep the World Championship match as the main event, and they did, as Zack Sabre Jr. defended the IWGP Heavyweight Championship against Ricochet. Now, Ricochet has been the big topic of conversation as of late with his new character presentation on AEW television, and I am in the camp of liking what they have done with him so far, and I look forward to seeing what happens with him and Swerve, especially coming after the previous week's Dynamite where he bloodied up Swerve with the golden scissors and all that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out. I half thought that we might get a Swerve appearance on this show and he might cost Ricochet the match here, but we did not get that. We got a straight up wrestling match between Sabre and Ricochet, which was fine. And even on any other night, it would have been a very fine match. As the main event of a big show like this, of a 4-hour show, having this as the main event, and then on top of that, this match main eventing and following what we just saw with Kenny Omega and Gabe Kidd, very tough spot for these two to be in, and the crowd really wasn't overly invested. Plus, Ricochet, no one thought for a second Ricochet had a prayer of winning this match, so that really played a factor in this thing too. But they still went out there and had a pretty decent match, except for the finish, which was quite anticlimactic. Sabre got Ricochet all twisted up in this arm submission, and he was wrenching back, and the referee just called for the bell, and that was it. The commentators clarified that, Ricochet, he verbally submitted. He couldn't take it anymore, and that was it. It's like, okay, I'll take your word for it, But the way it came off, I don't even know if my words are doing it justice here, but the way it came off, it just felt very anticlimactic and a very flat way to end this match and end this overall show. But it didn't detract from the show overall. I thought it was still a pretty good match on top of a very great show, and probably the first great pay-per-view of the year. Hopefully this is one of many. I would love to get to the end of the year and think, oh man, I forgot all about how great Wrestle Dynasty was, instead of thinking, man, Wrestle Dynasty was like the best show of the year and everything else just was a distant second. Hopefully this is a good starting point of the year. But I hope to look back on this show very fondly, and especially the Kenny Omega Gabe Kidd match when it comes to the end of the year. Looking back on things, thinking of best matches of the year, I would love to include that one, but at the same time, I would love to see it get outshined by even better matches, especially from Kenny Omega himself. They are heavily teasing something with Omega and Okada for All In Texas this July, so we'll see if that plays itself out and if a match like that will be able to top the one we saw here. But overall, very good show, and that is it. It is very late or early, depending on one's perspective here. But that's enough for me talking about this show. If you like what you heard, you like what you see, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on Twitter/X at DerekJ Speaks. Next time I will be talking to you guys will be not that long after this. It will be this upcoming Monday, January 6th, for the Raw on Netflix debut. A big show with Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa, Tribal Combat, CM Punk and Seth Rollins in their first big match. Get John Cena on the show. Who knows what other surprises will be on the show. Rhea Ripley, Liv Morgan for their title. It's going to be a big show, and I'm looking forward to the show itself, how the show and everything comes off presentation-wise on Netflix. What can we expect? How long will the show be? All that stuff. So that'll be the next time I talk to you guys in a review format. So until then, thank you very much, and take care.